And Democrats called it a vibe session and accused people of not understanding how good they had it when Joe Biden was president. So let's get to the details of what was really the case.
Hello, everybody. We are back with Anna Kasparian of the Young Turks today, and they're talking about what else? The economy. And despite the fact that Democrats have been saying that during Joe Biden's term of office that the economy was great, GDP was up and all those things, what does that actually mean for the real ordinary people who actually have to live, you know? Don't you find it interesting that their metrics are things like GDP in the stock market? Yeah, that might mean something to the rich people, but what does it mean to real ordinary people? Anyway, let's get into it and see what the Young Turks have to say about the economy and what and how the Democrats have been boosting, claiming victory in the economy.
We've seen sort of like, it's like this missing puzzle piece a lot of times, or even though we're getting positive information about the economy, voters still don't feel good. If people just feel bad, even if the metrics are telling us things aren't bad, does it feeling bad hurt Harris just because she has been in this administration for the last 4 years?
In today's economy, voters' vibes battle with clear-cut data. This is bizarre. It's not connected to reality, and the Wall Street Journal is exactly right. It's so much misinformation spewed out there that people are believing the lies, even though their own economic situation is good.
But was it? Was their economic situation good? Because it turns out their economic situation wasn't good, and the metrics that were being utilized to determine whether or not the economy was working well on behalf of the American people were not the right metrics to focus on. In fact, they were skewing the economic outlook to make it appear as though things were much better than they really were. And Democrats called it a vibe session and accused people of not understanding how good they had it when Joe Biden was president. So let's get to the details of what was really the case. So look, if you go by the traditional economic metrics, unemployment rate was at a mere 4.2% in November. Real GDP rose 12.6%. Productivity improved, and inflation fell from 7.2% in June of 2022 to 2.4% in November of 2024. But Eugene Ludwig, who's the chair of the Ludwig Institute, he named the institute after himself, didn't he? It's okay. I'm not judging, but Ludwig Institute for Shared Economic Prosperity, and also a former U.S. comptroller for the currency, disagrees with the whole vibe session narrative. And he talks about it in his latest piece for Politico titled, "Voters Were Right About the Economy, the Data Was Wrong." And look, this is something that drove me crazy as well. And I wanted people to understand. And when I say people, I don't mean voters. I mean the people in positions of power, the Democrats, the media. You guys are focusing on the wrong metrics. And when you tell people who are struggling economically that they just need to shut up and feel grateful for how awesome the economy is, that leads to political backlash.
So the clips that Anna Kasparian of the Young Turks was showing earlier here, those, of course, were from before the latest election in November 2024, and that was the mainstream media, the Democrat-leaning, liberal-leaning mainstream media were all trying to hype the economy, saying that Joe Biden was doing a great job. And, of course, the voters didn't believe it because they can... who are they going to believe? The pundits on the mainstream liberal media or their own lying eyes? And of course, they believe their eyes because they live in the real world, unlike those guys.
And I think Democrats suffered from that in this last election cycle. So at the Ludwig Institute, he assembled a team of researchers to delve deeply into some of the most frequently cited headline statistics. And what we uncovered shocked us. The bottom line is that for 20 years or more, including the months prior to the election, voter perception was more reflective of reality than the incumbent statistics, but not because of some nefarious plot. He says that the data that was collected by government agencies was accurate and that most of the staff at these agencies were well-intentioned, but the filters used to compute the headline statistics are flawed. As a result, they paint a much rosier picture of reality than bears out on the ground. So let's start with unemployment. He uses unemployment as an example of a statistic that does mislead in multiple ways. So first, it counts as employed the millions of people who are unwillingly underemployed. That is, people, for example, who work only a few hours each week while searching for a full-time job. Second, it does not take into account many Americans who have been so discouraged that they are no longer trying to find a job. Finally, the prevailing statistic does not account for the meagerness of any individual's income. Thus, you could be homeless on the streets, making an intermittent income and functionally incapable of keeping your family fed, and the government would still count you as employed.
Now that's very interesting. You know, as they say, you can tell any lie with statistics. And of course, you have to know what the statistics are actually measuring. You have to know when these, numbers are reported in the media, what are they actually measuring? So this is a fantastic that all these people are being counted as employed, even though they've stopped looking for a job. So I guess that doesn't count as unemployed anymore, or you're just barely scraping by in the gig economy or panhandling on the streets or whatever. Super underemployed, in other words. Yeah, it's insane. I have a feeling that all countries do this, of course. All governments play with statistics, but it is good to see some reality here.
So that's how the statistics get skewed. And I have more examples that were provided in this excellent piece that I highly recommend you guys all read. But John, I want to stop and get some comment from you.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. I think it, as you pointed out, you use the metrics you have, but you should also always be hoping that they will be the best. You should be updating them and all that. And it's sort of, for years we've gone back and we've said very often these analyses will focus on whether the stock market is doing well, which is an indicator of the economy, but also pointless for people who don't have any stocks. It's what do you include in your equation is super important. And so they should definitely update that. What the Biden administration could have done is, at the very least, so long as those metrics, even if flawed, are consistent over time, you could potentially talk about improvement. But don't tell people, to what Joe Scarborough was saying, regardless of whether you think the metrics are good or not, it's hardly a good strategy in any event to tell people that they're wrong about their perception of their own economic situation. How the hell could that possibly ever work? That said, there is definitely a component of how people feel about the economy that isn't 100% about their own raw evaluation of their own condition. And we can see a version of that play out basically every time power switches hands. I mean, you've probably seen the charts where people's evaluation of whether the economy is good, Democrats, after Trump won, it nosedove, and for Republicans, it went up. They didn't suddenly get richer. I mean, Elon Musk did, a few of them did, but most Republicans didn't get richer, but now they suddenly think the economy is better, even though it's from one day to the next. Now, you have to dive into all that. You have to see what they think about their own condition, what they think about their area, and also the country at large. And with all the money they have flowing in these campaigns, they should be able to do all of those and tailor their messaging to fit.
Yeah, and look, I will say this. After a newly elected president gets inaugurated, the partisans and hyper-partisans who supported that party that is represented by the president are gonna they don't want to say anything negative, right? They're so elated that they're going to support and say glowing things about the economy because they want to support the guy they voted for. But I think an important indicator of how Americans, including Democrats, were feeling were the polling that ended up showing how terrible Democratic voters were feeling about their economic situation while Biden was in charge. And so it was frustrating to hear from members of the media and Democratic politicians who just kind of brushed that off and pretended as though these were people who didn't know what they were talking about and the economy is great. And by the way, I think part of the problem is, especially in Congress, we're talking about so many millionaires who are so disconnected from what Americans are experiencing on the ground. And I think that disconnect makes it difficult for them to message about what the reality is, right? Or even acknowledge what the reality is. And
yeah, I would agree with that. Of course, the politicians in the federal government, just like high-level politicians everywhere, including here in Western Europe, where I live, are completely out of touch. Now, the United States, as in many things, just takes that to a whole new level. You have a true oligarchy forming there, or already formed there. Another interesting thing, which is not mentioned in this clip, is sort of the social element. So yeah, I mean, an economy can be booming, but for whom is it booming? And is it, maybe you can say, okay, more people are working, but is that because we let in, loads of immigrants from around the world? And yeah, they're working. We let in loads of H-1B visas, and they're working. They're earning lots of money, but at what cost? They've displaced native workers, for example. And yeah, the overall number might be up, but the perception amongst a lot of people will be down. Or like the whole free trade mantra that began in, I guess, the 80s, with NAFTA and all this, and which has resulted in what we have today, where the United States barely produces anything anymore. So whole communities in the United States were destroyed by free trade. Production was offshored to lower cost countries. And yeah, that's great for the economy, or it's great for certain economic operators, but it's horrible for many, many communities around the country. Is that kind of thing taken into account? No, of course not. Is anybody going to be held accountable and pay for that? No, of course not. So anyway, it's interesting. We'll see how Trump works out on the economy, of course. Right now, it's mid-February 2025, and everybody's blaming Trump for the high price of eggs in America. Even though, as far as I know, he has nothing to do with it. There was a huge culling of hens, apparently. Millions of them were culled before he even took office. For some reason, there was some bird flu scare or something. So anyway, we'll see where Trump goes with the economy. Interesting to see Anna Kasparian of the Young Turks talking about it. And I'll leave it there for today. If you have any comments, please write them. I've been reading all the comments recently, replying to quite a few. And take the opportunity to subscribe. I really appreciate it. We're nearing 6,000 subscribers. So thank you, all of you who subscribed. And I will see you in the next video.